And this boy, whose name is Boyd, he comes up toward the end of one of the service and says, "Preacher, is there anything for me? Do you have a healing for me?" Jonas pretends not to see him, walks away, ends the show. The crowd yells for one more healing. So he comes back and he tries to prep everybody for what he believes is going to be a failed healing. And Boyd stands there and he comes up and he touches his hands at the feet of the crucifix, and his crutches fall away and he begins to walk unaided. Miraculous. The crowd goes wild, the cheering's unabated, the money pours in, people are praising Jonas, people are praising God. It's an exciting moment, and it's too much for Jonas. Later that evening, he comes into the empty tent and he is angry. He is absolutely fuming, can't stand it, is so mad, and he finally rails at God. "When did you make so many suckers? You say love never endeth, while I say love never started. The meek shall inherit the earth, you say. Well, the meek just get the short end of the stick. You say, is anyone pure of heart? And I say, no, not one." He's finally had this moment where he's able to be vulnerable and authentic and open before God, and this pain and this brokenness that he's been experiencing just kind of spills out all over the empty stage. And he kind of gets interrupted. Boyd comes back in to thank him for this great healing, and Jonas says, I'm really just a con artist. I'm a fake. And Boyd pushes back on him a bit, and he pushes back with a line that he has heard Jonas use even toward him, and he says, "What difference does it make as long as it gets the job done?" And Jonas says, "Kid, it makes all the difference in the world." True, authentic change. This moment where he's come to finally admit that he's wrong, where something has to change in order for him to move forward. Have you ever found yourself at a sort of crossroads like that? Where you know that in order to successfully move forward, something in your life has to change? Where you say to yourself, well, now that I know what I know, I have to do things differently? I have to ask, does anybody here like change? No, not a one. Oh, we got one. We tend to like the change that that benefits us or that works best for us, right? Maybe not necessarily the difficult change. Now, research tells us, and we know this, it takes over 2 months for us to make a new behavior automatic. That takes hard work. That takes hard work. You have to be committed to this new behavior. You have to be compelled by whatever this proposed outcome is about to be. Now, our journey with God is filled with all sorts of steps and all sorts of stages, and it's not necessarily sequential, and some are more important than others, but generally an early on step is something that in the Greek is called metanoia. It's a fun word. And what it means is to change one's mind, to repent, to turn away from what you're doing, and to turn toward God. It's this clear replanting of one's feet. It's not that spinning around and around of the lazy Susan that we do till we find our lost Tupperware. It is a clear replanting. And it doesn't mean we have to do it perfectly, but it means we're doing things differently. We gain a new perspective. We gain a new worldview, a new way of doing things. Ezekiel 18, but a wicked person who turns his back on that life of sin and keeps all my statutes, living a just and righteous life, he'll live, really live. Scripture reflects this change that happens at the core, at the depth of our being. It insinuates this desire to do things differently. I read an article this week entitled "The Dangers of Distracted Parenting." And I wasn't going to click on it. It's got to be clickbait, first of all. Second of all, we don't need any more ammo against the family and against technology and all of these kinds of things. But the person who posted it, I trust, seems pretty legit, so I opened it up. And basically, what it begins to say is that when parents have their faces buried in their phones, they are physically present and emotionally absent, which seems pretty obvious. But it goes on to further posit that when a parent has been distracted by some sort of device, even if it's a quick text message, even if it's just checking in for a moment to social media, that what it does is it interrupts this back and forth conversation that parents have with their children. It is the way that kids learn vocabulary. It's the way kids understand language. Kids who have that regular back and forth interaction with their parents have an exponentially increased vocabulary. Not only that, but when a parent is distracted by their device, they also miss out on the cues that their child is sending. They miss the opportunity to respond to the emotional needs of their kid. Now, to be clear, it is not asking that a child be the unwavering center of attention in a parent's life. We need space. We need lots of space. And space is good. But what it's saying is that when you are present, and I would posit to say when you are present with any human being, whether it's a parent and child, anybody else that lives and breathes and is standing in front of you, when you are present, be emotionally and mentally present. I even read another article the other day that said when you put your phone on the table, people are less likely to have a deep conversation because they're afraid they're going to be interrupted at any second. And as I read this article, it struck home for me a bit. I pride myself on being available. And as a person who uses social media often, not only for personal but for business reasons, my phone is almost always nearby. It's a life change. It's a call to a life change. Right now, most changes are much more difficult than just learning how to put your cell phone down, right? Most things that have these kinds of cataclysmic changes in our life require great strength. Maybe we have some sort of seismic shift in our thinking where all of a sudden we view others differently. We see their value and their worth and their equality. Or perhaps we have this seismic shift in how we view God, and all of a sudden we see God's justice and God's love and God's inclusivity. It's a tough mountain to climb, these kinds of changes. It's tough. It requires a change in our mind, a change in our behavior. It requires a change in how we do things. But this is what God has called us to do. This new way of doing things, it means we no longer reflect the world, but we reflect God in all things. We are called to be in, not of, the world. We are called to be of God, belonging to God. We are to seek the approval of God, not the approval of others. We're to accomplish God's goals, not the world's goals. When we turn towards God, here's what happens. We are no longer consumed by a world that says fear others. Fear those who aren't like you. Fear those who don't look like you, who don't talk like you, who aren't from the same place that you're from. And instead, we embrace God's call that says love all, accept all, welcome all. We no longer see the world and cast judgment on our neighbors or selfishly seek our own gain or try to stand at the top of the heap as the most accomplished. But instead, we reflect the attitude and the actions of Jesus, who built relationships with those that others wouldn't touch. Those on the fringes, the lepers, the poor, the orphan, the widow, the migrant, the hungry. We imitate Jesus, who walked humbly and loved deeply. Jesus, who sought to erase the lines that we so like to draw that divide us from one another. This Jesus, whom we follow, called his followers to see their own brokenness and then asked them to live a better way. Not a way of following a set of rules, but instead following the God who loved them. When I was a youth pastor, the students loved to ask me, what is it that I can and can't do? Can you tell me what right and wrong is so I know exactly where the line is and I can run right up to it? And I would say to them, guys, my job is not to give you a list of black and white rules for you to learn how to live. My job instead is to teach you about who God is and teach you how to have a relationship with God so that God can inform you how to live. And I have to say, as I stand here before you today, I'm not so certain that my job has changed all that much. My job is still to teach you about who God is and to help you know how to form a relationship with God so that God can teach us how to live. That's the result of transformation. That's the result of turning toward God. Not having all the right answers, not being exactly theologically accurate, not knowing what's right and what's wrong and who's in and who's out and who I get to judge and who I have to love and all of those kinds of things. It's no longer seeing this binary black and white space that requires us to blindly follow a set of rules. It is instead seeing our Creator who is calling us into relationship and asking us to change how we see the world. To see the world as God sees the world. And for our hearts to break as God's heart breaks. Richard Rohr describes this transformation as such. You just think and feel differently about most things. If this does not happen in very specific ways, I have no reason to believe you've been converted. Your motivation foundationally changes from security, status, and sabotage to generosity, humility, and cooperation. If you do not want to go there, you better stay away from the Holy One. So what's it going to take? Where do we need to turn our back and instead follow God? What views do we hold that don't align with who God is? What perspective and opinions do we have that neglect the care of others? What distractions disconnect us from others? What world perspective is more important to us than the perspective of God? What is it that we're holding to so tightly that we can't let go and grasp a hold of God? Are we willing to get to a space of generosity, of humility, and of cooperation? Ultimately, I think the question that stands before us today is, are we ready to change how we see the world? Maybe so for all of us. Amen.